We have seen many Delaware cases entrusting the board with wide discretion. Kamin, Alice Chalmers, Unocal, Moran. And we have seen other cases, like Meinhardt and Salmon and Smith and Van Gorkum, trying to constrain this discretion. But no other case limits board discretion as much as Revlon. Thus, the case occupies a legendary position in the Delaware universe. To understand why, let's start with the facts. Revlon, the well-known cosmetics company, was the target of a takeover bid. The bidder was Ronald Perelman, an activist investor, and his company, Pantry Pride. At the time, Revlon share was trading on the stock exchange for $25 per share. Perelman announces a tender offer for $47.5, at a significant premium to market price, I guess about 90% or so. In response, Revlon's board adopts a poison pill. Now, you might be thinking, well, they've adopted a poison pill, so the tender offer can't go forward anymore. So Perelman increases his bid to $50 per share, double the market price. Why is this a response to a poison pill? Because it tempts shareholders who might want to sell. Shareholders are the only ones who can remove the board in a shareholder election. So if the board keeps resisting and does not want to redeem the rights and block the poison pill, the shareholders can remove them. So by upping the offer, Perelman kind of starts putting additional pressure on the board. Revlon's board decides to buy back shares from certain shareholders, but they don't have the resources to do so. So they borrow. They issue notes to the market and use the proceeds to purchase shares, about 20% of the company's stock. What can Perelman do now to tempt the remaining 80% of Revlon shareholders? Increase the price, of course. He offers $53 per share. And then, when that doesn't do the trick, he goes up even further to $56.25 per share. By this point, the board is out of resources. They have no corporate funds left, and they have tapped the market already with a notes issuance. What can boards do when they run out of options? They look for outside help, typically in the form of another financier. Hopefully, they can convince the new financier to launch a competing bid and buy the shares, allowing the board to stay and implement its strategy, or at the very least, propose an alternative vision for the company that may or may not include the current board. This strategy is known as a white knight, who comes in shining armor to save the board from the siege. And in this case, the board's white knight is called Theodore Forstmann, another very famous investor in the 80s and 90s in New York. As Forstmann is trying to offer them alternatives, he suggests selling some assets to come up with more money. But as the board starts removing the asset sale restrictions from the notes, the value of the notes drops, because assets previously available to note holders are now going to be sold. This drop in the value of the notes becomes a major worry for the board, who are concerned about lawsuits from note holders and make supporting the value of the notes a priority in their negotiations with Forstmann. After much back and forth, Forstmann completes his due diligence in Revlon and submits his own bid for $57.25 per share. But he also has a lot of additional requirements. An asset lockup, meaning that the board cannot sell any more assets. A no-shop clause, which means the board cannot go around looking for other bids. Finally, a breakup fee. If the board doesn't take his bid, then they have to pay him something in return. But he agrees that he's going to support the value of the notes by issuing some type of guarantee. So Because of these additional requirements, he's able to offer this price, $57.25, which is better than what Perelman had been able to do so far. But how does Perelman react? He increases his price further and now offers $58 per share. These are the final options on the table for the board. What is it supposed to do? To start, it is important to understand that with such premiums on offer, and after extensive due diligence, it is clear that these prices are likely to be very close to what the board believes the company is really worth, and prove extremely tempting for shareholders. It is very hard to imagine the board convincing shareholders to abandon both offers and continue independently. The board wants to recommend that shareholders take Forstmann's offer, because Forstmann is the guy that they've negotiated with. And not just recommend, but also support it by tendering their own 20%. But can they do so, given that Perelman ultimately offered the highest bid? At this point, Perelman files for an injunction, arguing that the board would be violating its duties if it sided with Forstmann. First, let's think about the whole problem from the perspective of a shareholder. Shareholders are going to sell their stock, take their cash, and exit the company forever. Why would a shareholder care whether the company goes to Perelman or to Forstmann? The only thing they care about is how much money they're going to get for their stock. And the guy who happens to be offering the highest price is, of course, Perelman. Now, let's hold this intuition and look at the board's dilemma from a fiduciary duty perspective. Are we talking about a duty of care violation, or are we talking about a duty of loyalty violation? If it's a duty of care violation, directors can be indemnified. If it's a duty of loyalty violation, they can't. So that's an important distinction. Let's start with a suggestion to go for the lowest of the two bids, and not the highest. As we established, what would have been in the shareholders' interest is to go with the highest bid, regardless of what happens to the company afterwards. So, by not recommending the highest bid, the board fails to put shareholders first. Why does the board choose the lowest bid? Because they are concerned about the notes and the note holders, as evidenced by the terms they negotiated with Forstmann in support of the note's value. Directors might be concerned that they might be sued, but they cannot put the interest of not being sued themselves ahead of their obligations towards shareholders. This is a conflict of interest, essentially. But the court also finds important duty of care violations. The board offered Forstmann more access, more information, more due diligence, while they barely engaged with Perelman. As a result of these negotiations, they offered Forstmann more advantageous terms, in particular the asset lockup and the breakup fee. And all this suggests that the board's intention was to get them to sell the company to Forstmann. So it really showed a preference towards Forstmann. Is this preference towards Forstmann a violation of the duty of care? As the board, if you're interested in getting a good offer, you're supposed to play one bidder against the other. You're not supposed to talk only with one. In Revlon, the board tried to defend itself by arguing that if they hadn't negotiated with Forstmann, they would not have gotten an alternative offer from anyone. So there would have been no pressure on Perelman to increase his bid. Moreover, Perelman himself seems to have agreed that he did not need to know all the information that changed hands between Forstmann and the board. As long as he knew Forsman's actual offer, he knew what the company was worth. But the court is not convinced. It holds that the board's tactics cannot have the effect of excluding the other bidder from any bid. The board's duty of care suggests that it has to engage with all bidders, and it has to try to get both to give the best bid possible, and not just exclude one and fight him out. But the court goes much further than a discussion of which specific conduct of the board violated the duty of care or the duty of loyalty. And it's this expansive holding that gives Revlon its true force. The court holds that when a sale or breakup of the company becomes inevitable, quote, the director's role is changed from defendants of the corporate bastion to auctioneers, charged with getting the best price for the stockholders at the sale of the company. The director's role remains an active one, changed only in the respect that they are charged with the duty of selling the company at the highest price attainable to the stockholders' benefit. End quote. To understand Revlon's importance, we need to contrast it with Unocal. Unocal allows the board to put up defenses, essentially not sell. Yes, they need to show that there is a threat to shareholders, and their reaction must be proportional to that threat, i.e., it cannot prohibit any possibility of success for the bidder. But the board has wide discretion to react. In contrast, Revlon mandates the board to sell. No more defenses, no more strategic bypasses, just sell to the highest bidder. What is the line separating Unocal from Revlon? According to the court, it is when the sale or breakup of the company has become inevitable. But what does this mean in practice? How does the board get into Revlon territory? This is a question that Delaware courts have been refining ever since Revlon was first issued. We would need another 2-credit course to answer this question in full. In fact, you can take mergers and acquisitions, where you will learn more about the doctrinal pathways opened by Revlon. But I wanted to give you a quick test of these holdings so that we have a better sense of the ultimate resolution. Here are some situations in which courts have found for Unocal or Revlon. In Paramount and Time, the board of Time was engaged in discussions with Warner to create a media company that would combine Warner's entertainment content with Time's journalistic tradition. It would be a stock-for-stock merger, and thus Time shareholders would continue to be shareholders of the combined entity. They had engaged in a long negotiation and had come up with a governance strategy to best achieve a successful amalgamation of their two different propositions into one unified business strategy. When they announced the merger, Paramount came up with a higher offer. Nevertheless, the court held that Time's board was right in disregarding Paramount's offer and sticking with Warner. The board believed that its careful strategy would be better for shareholders in the long term. And since shareholders would stick with the company, the board's judgment should be trusted. Generally, when shareholders do not exit the company, i.e., when the consideration is not cash but stock in a combined company, then Revlon is less likely to be triggered. If, on the other hand, the transaction involves merging with a company that will become a controlling shareholder, then Revlon is more likely to be triggered. When shareholders accept stock in a company run by someone else, they have to accept that they are unlikely to influence the board from now on. Thus, this transaction sounds more like the end of the line for the company, replacing the prior investment proposition with a new one.